Hello, welcome back to Logan For Liberty. This is the second podcast. This is part 2 of Government Force. Originally, it was supposed to all be one episode, but I got carried away and I added so many stories. Basically, what we're talking about is we're talking about the force of government, obviously, as you would expect with an episode called Government Force. And it wasn't about police brutality, it was about the force and the power that the government has over you in general. So we started out talking about a story about how cops shot 3 dogs in a marijuana raid. By the way, the dogs were on the other side of the fence. They did it just to get a few plants, and the city of Detroit had to pay them $225,000, but sometimes you don't have the luxury of suing them because it costs a lot of money, and sometimes instead of a dog, they shoot a human. And this is over marijuana, by the way. So I just want to make that clear that the government has power to enter your property, shoot your dogs, or even take you away, and if you resist, shoot you because you decided to smoke some marijuana. And by the way, this person that had their dogs shot, they had a license to grow marijuana, but it was slightly exposed to the public. We also talked about how a San Francisco man tried to convert his laundromat into an apartment building on property that he already owns, on something that he has already built. He's not expanding the property, he's just expanding the building by going up. So he waited 4 years and spent $1 million trying to get that built, and still is not able to build it because of certain factors, people complaining because it might ruin the environment, blah, blah, blah. And if he was to, and this is in California, they have a housing crisis, if he was to build it anyway, the government would come to his house and arrest him and fine him for trying to build houses that people need in California. And also, we talked about how California wants to fine you $500 for washing your car with a garden hose. And who comes to your door if you try to wash your car with a garden hose? And then we also talked about we went over the buzz segment, which we talked about how California wants to fine waiters and waitresses who offer a plastic drinking straw to a customer without being asked. And then 2 lawmakers in New York have introduced legislation to ban Tide Pods. I don't think that has gone anywhere. I'll check for you later on, and I'll do an update on that. But it's still a sad attempt that they think that they have the power to do that. That is also government power. What happens if you truck in Tide Pods or you order Tide Pods from Amazon? What's going to happen? Are the police going to show up to your door? And then we talked... Yeah, so that was it. And now we're going to continue. I still have some stories I want to tell you regarding government power, government legislation. What are the consequences of your actions if you don't do what the government says? If you give out a plastic straw, what happens? Well, you're charged $100 or $1,000. You're charged $1,000. And what happens if you can't afford that $1,000? Well, you go to jail. They send the police to your house. You go to jail, or they keep increasing your fines until you go to jail. I don't know how it works, how that specific law would work, but that's how the legal system basically works. What else? So I think that's it. Without further ado, let's get started. Okay, well, the United States, the USA, is the greatest country in the world, isn't it? I actually think it's a pretty great country. The United SWATs of America, the United States of America is the home of the brave, land of the free, and coalition of the SWAT teams. So this comes from a news article from nationalreview.com. The United States of SWAT. So let's talk about all the different organizations or departments of government that has a SWAT team. The Department of Agriculture has a SWAT team. I mean, your Secret Service has a SWAT team. I mean, obviously, that should surprise no one. It's for good reason. They protect the president. And they enforce laws about counterfeit money. But the Department of Agriculture has a SWAT team. I mean, you never know when you might need to shoot farmers. I mean, have you seen the way they treat cattle? It's like a modern-day Nazi Germany. I'm serious. Don't mess with the fascist sympathizing soybean farmers. Don't mess with Nazi Missouri or North Kentucky. They're also not the only department that has a SWAT team. The Railroad Retirement Board also has a SWAT team. Tennessee Valley Authority, the Office of Personnel Management, the Consumer Product Safety Commission, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the U.S. Department of Education, and the Food and Drug Administration have SWAT teams. And those aren't even the only ones. I mean, on a federal level, you have SWAT. On a state level, you have some sort of SWAT team. And even on some local areas where there's a big enough population, there's SWAT. I mean, and that's what I just listed, only on top of the FBI, the BOP, the DEA, the USMS, ATF, CBP, ICE, U.S. Secret Service, the Bureau of Diplomatic Security, the Pentagon Force Protection Agency, what else? The National Institutes of Health, National Nuclear Safety Administration, and NASA. Those are all organizations that have SWAT teams. So, and what I didn't mention on there was the Department of Education. I mentioned the Department of Agriculture, but let's talk about the Department of Education. So, Kenneth Wright of Stockton, California, got a visit from the SWAT team. From a SWAT team from the U.S. Department of Education in June 2011. Now, I know this was in 2011, and it's 2018 right now, but it's to shine a light on the fact that the Department of Education has a SWAT team. Agents battered down the door of his home at 6 a.m., dragged him outside in his boxer shorts, and handcuffed him as they put his 3 children, ages 3, 7, and 11, in a police car for 2 hours while they searched his home. The raid was allegedly intended to uncover information on Wright's estranged wife, Michelle, who hadn't been living with him and was suspected of college financial aid fraud. You couldn't get a warrant, knock on the door, and ask to search? I mean, seriously, and this is the Department of Education. They couldn't have just gotten the local police? No, the federal government had to go into California. And by the way, the California is already, I hate to use the word, because I hate to sound like a Alex Jones type, the government's gonna get you and put you in caskets for FEMA. You know, some crap like that. But California is already a police state. I mean, we just talked about it on the last podcast, and I mentioned it in this podcast. A $1,000 fine for a waitress or a waiter who gives out a plastic straw without asking. The ability to be charged $500 for using a garden hose. Or a man who is trying to convert the property that he already owns, a laundromat, into an apartment complex for homes in California. And the average rent there is $3,500 because of high demand. A combination between high demand and regulation. A lot has to do with high demand. They need apartments, and he wasn't able to do it because they were afraid. They needed to do studies on the wind, how that would affect the wind. It casted a shadow over a nearby school. And they were afraid that it would displace some business somehow by bringing in consumers and producers. So, California is a police state. Because how do you enforce those laws, the police? What happens if you find somebody and they don't pay their fines? The police show up. So I'm not saying it's a police state out of a conspiracy theory. I'm saying it's a police state because of actual regulation and pending laws. that they have in effect already. Let's talk about the Food and Drug Administration. A SWAT team raided the farm of Dan Algier of Lancaster, Pennsylvania. His crime was shipping unpasteurized milk across state lines to a cooperative of young women with children in Washington, D.C. called Grass-Fed on the Hill. Raw milk can be sold in Pennsylvania, but it is illegal to transport it across state lines. The raid forced Algier to close down his business. So imagine a SWAT team coming to your doorstep or coming to your farm, raiding your farm, because you're shipping unpasteurized milk to a state where it's legal, because it's illegal to ship it across state lines, along state lines. Whose business is it whether or not you're shipping unpasteurized milk to people who want pasteurized milk? A SWAT team raided this guy's farm for that. And I thought that fit nicely into an episode about government force, because this was something I didn't know about these instances until I researched them, but I already knew that almost every single department of the U.S. government has their own SWAT team. And I understand having a SWAT team for counterterrorism, even, and maybe the most extreme cases of law enforcement. But to use it for somebody shipping unpasteurized milk? And why does the Department of Education need a SWAT team? These aren't these departments sending local police or state police or the FBI. They have their own SWAT teams. So I think that's ridiculous. But I'll let you be the judge of that. I'm here to tell you what I think. From there, you can do with whatever I tell you, whatever you want. You can fact check me. You can believe what I say. You cannot believe what I say. Whatever, that's fine. I'm just telling you what I think. And I'm not going into conspiracies. I'm going into what's well documented. I'm not doing any, the moon landing was a hoax type conspiracy. I am telling you what's been reported on by reputable news sources. I mean, I guess reputable as in real news, not necessarily unbiased news. So, let's move on. Denver cashes in by seizing cars for low-level crimes, even without conviction. So, this is called asset forfeiture. I mean, let's just begin by saying, if you steal property, if you steal someone's property, you'd probably go to jail. If you weren't shot in the process. However, a Denver cab driver named Samir Freemichael got caught up in an undercover prostitution sting. He was innocent. He thought she wanted a ride, not sex for pay, and he was acquitted by a judge. His taxi, however, got taken for a rough ride. Denver's Fox affiliate has an excellent two-part investigation showing how the city attorney's office is using civil asset forfeiture to cash in by snatching vehicles like Freemichael's for even low-level crimes, and even when their owners aren't convicted. In 2016, Denver made more than $2.4 million, seizing more than 1,800 vehicles and forcing the civil forfeiture component of its public nuisance abatement laws. Civil forfeiture is a controversial procedure that allows cities and states and the federal government to seize and keep somebody's assets and property without actually convicting them of a crime. So, before I get into that story, let's talk about the prostitution sting. What business is it if this taxi driver wanted to pay a prostitute for sex? Whose business is it? I'll tell you whose. Nobody's. That's something I am willing to tell you. That's a fact. If there's a prostitute or an escort and you want to pay them $200 or whatever their price is, anywhere from $50 to $1,000 depending on the quality, why are you not allowed to? so that's before going on to the story. I just want to identify the fact that this person had property stolen from them, and even if he was doing an exchange for adult services, that shouldn't have happened in the first place. But let's talk about it. He got his taxi stolen. And listen, let's say he was, I don't know, he had dead bodies in the back of his trunk. Then I could see seizing his property, even if he wasn't convicted yet. Because, innocent until proven guilty. But I could see seizing property in that sense. I mean, maybe we can come to the middle and agree on that aspect. But for prostitution, that's an entirely different story. And he was acquitted by a judge, meaning there really wasn't any proof that he was exchanging money for adult services with this prostitute. He was just giving her a ride. I don't know how this particular sting happened, but it's besides the point because it's a stupid sting. I don't think anybody should go to jail for paying for a prostitute, and I don't think prostitutes should go to jail. That's just legalized sex work. I personally, morally disagree with it. I would never solicit the services of an escort. But that doesn't mean other people shouldn't have the right to. That doesn't mean that a woman shouldn't have the right to control her own body and make money off her body how she sees fit. Think about it. It's legal to work for money, to use your body for money, to perform labor. It's legal to have sex. But you put those two together, oh God, no. We have a degenerate act, and we must stop it, and we must use the government with guns to enforce this law. That's just the way I see it. I'm coming from a biased perspective. I admit that. I tend to lean towards the side of liberty. I think prostitution should be legal. I think private property rights would help alleviate the problem of the drought that they're not having in California anymore. So that way you don't have to be fined $500 for using a garden hose. Let's talk about asset forfeiture. Basically, the government has the right to come and seize your property without you actually being convicted of a crime. I understand if you commit a crime. For example, you own a house, you commit murder, and they seize some of your property. I think first it should go to the family of the criminal so they can decide what to do with it. But I could see seizing anything that was involved in the murder. Maybe they find blood on, maybe he kills somebody, brings them to their house, lays them on the couch, and there's blood on the couch. I could see them taking that. That's evidence. And then after that, seize the property. But they get to keep the property, and then they get to make money off of it. There's a slippery slope with asset forfeiture, even if you allow it with somebody who has actually committed a crime. And I say there's a slippery slope. I don't know if slippery slope is the right term for that. There's a gray area. Because somebody commits a crime. Should that property be seized by the government, or should it be given to the immediate family? I think that's something that we have to talk about. But this is wrong. For the most part, civil asset forfeiture, especially when there is no crime committed, it's reprehensible. I don't agree with it. I think it's 100% wrong. One way of explaining it, of me describing how I feel about asset forfeiture, it's not necessarily how I feel about it. I mean, it is how I feel about it. But basically what it is what they're saying is that you don't own your property. You do not own your own property. The government does. If you can get accused of a crime, have your assets forfeited over to the government. By the way, it's not voluntary forfeiture. It's they're They're seizing your assets, whether or not you voluntarily forfeit, whether or not you have been convicted of a crime. I know I sound like I'm whining a little bit, but that's stress in my voice. This, I don't know how to properly put it into words without swearing or screaming. I mean, I don't actually want to scream, but it's morally reprehensible. Like I said, what they're saying is that you do not own your own property. The government owns it, and they may seize it if they think you've done something wrong. Even if a judge acquits you of the crime that you're being accused of, meaning there's not a sufficient amount of evidence to convict you. So let's go on. Let's continue. There's one more story that I want to talk about. So, what would you do if somebody... Honest question. I want to know what you folks think. What would you do if somebody entered your house at 9:30 p.m. unexpectedly? What would you do? And I'm not saying they open your door and walk in. Well, no, actually, yeah. Question number one. What would you do if somebody turned the doorknob, walked into your house at 9:30 p.m. at night? You'd probably be a little freaked out. I know what I would do. I would reach for my gun. Like, yo, what the fuck are you doing? Especially if I don't recognize them. Or if nobody was invited over and they're entering my house at 9:30 p.m. But now let's say they bust down your door at 9:30 p.m. Some of you already know where I'm going with this. You're in bed, getting ready for bed. Maybe you're already sleeping. It's 9:30 p.m. and the police bust down your door. Sorry, I gave it away. But somebody, not the police. Say it's not the police. Say it's 9:30 p.m. and somebody busts down your door. How do you react? You're probably not going to be very thrilled. You're probably going to react pretty harshly. Well, police officers in Bartlesville, Oklahoma, killed a 72-year-old woman during a raid on her home. And by the way, there is a video of this, and I'll link the article in the description box below. There's a video of this, and everything I'm describing is in the video. According to her 50-year-old son, who was arrested on drug charges during the raid, Geraldine Townsend was sleeping when police entered. She woke up, grabbed a pellet gun, and shot at the cops. And one of the cops shot back. Now, you can say that, well, you know, you shouldn't aim a gun at a police officer. Yeah, and the police shouldn't bust down your door 9:30 at night. Now, I know what you're saying. It's, how do you know it's 9:30 at night? The article doesn't say it. Well, I'll get onto that. It'll say it in the article later on. Now, what kind of drugs was this person on? What kind of drug charges was he being convicted of? Well, we'll go over that. But as far as I'm concerned, the police bust down your door when you know that you've done nothing wrong. You have an obligation to protect your property, especially when you're asleep and somebody busts down your fucking door. I'm sorry, I'm cussing. That's not good. Two of the officers suffered minor injuries. Bartlesville Police Captain Hay Hastings told local reporters Townsend was transported to the hospital where she died from the gunshot wound to her chest. The body camera footage of the altercation is blurry, but the audio is revealing the raid began in the dark at 9:30 p.m. Officers knocked on the door and said police department search warrant. 5 seconds later, they entered the premises. Townsend's son, Mike Anthony Livingston, immediately surrendered. He was the target of the raid, suspected of distributing marijuana. So, there's a few things. I know some people are going to say they announced themselves. Police. But the article says, and if you watch the camera footage, which I have, it's hard to watch. They announced their presence, and then they busted down the door in 5 seconds. They didn't give anybody a chance to answer the door. Now you can say, well, if it was a drug raid, then they're afraid of drug dealers shooting back at them or getting ready. You know, you don't want to have them get in position. Okay, well then don't knock at somebody's door over marijuana. You know? A joint. I'm sure it was more than a joint. He was suspected of distributing marijuana. Whatever, fine. Marijuana. I can understand the argument for heroin, even opioids. But marijuana? Are you kidding me? I don't even like marijuana. As I stated in the last episode, I despise marijuana. It's not something I'm into. Really, it's not. So, what are the police doing at 9:30 at night? Busting down a door at 9:30 p.m. over marijuana. What do you expect to happen? By the way, you can watch the body cam footage. It's linked in the article. They show it in the article. I'll link it in the description box below. I warn you, it's not an easy few minutes of footage to watch. A 72-year-old lady shot because her son might have been distributing marijuana. Or was suspected of distributing marijuana. Regardless if he was distributing marijuana, a 72-year-old lady died because they busted down her door at 9:30 p.m. over marijuana. Whose business is it? What you put into your own body, or what you distribute for other people to choose to put into their own body? Nonetheless, 9:30 at night. Livingston warns the officers, "That's my mother, man." An officer is heard to shout, "Put that fucking gun down," presumably at Townsend, who fires. Livingston insists it's a BB gun as additional shots ring out. At this point, about 10 seconds have elapsed since the cops entered. Over the next few minutes, Livingston repeatedly says, "You killed my mother, it was a BB gun." Eventually, one of the officers snapped at him, "She shot me, shut up." The officer who shot Townsend explains his actions to the officer wearing the body camera. "I fucking saw her point that fucking gun. It looked like she stopped and shot Steven, and then I come back around to cover him. She pointed it at me, and then blam, I fucking shot her." A BB gun. A fucking BB gun. A 72-year-old lady got shot because she pointed a BB gun at the police. Now, I understand if a police officer is out on patrol and somebody walks by with a BB gun and points it at the officer. I get that. That's 100% understandable if that officer shoots back. But you bust down somebody's door at 9:30 p.m. for marijuana, bust into the 72-year-old lady's room. You could have asked the son if there was anybody in the house, and you hear the son on the video saying, "That's my mother, man. It's a BB gun. It's a fucking BB gun." And they shoot her because they're in her house, on her property, at 9:30 p.m. for marijuana. I don't care if you're doing fucking heroin. Nobody should come busting your door at 9:30 p.m. at night when people are asleep. Like I said, I would have done the same thing in my reaction, but instead of a BB gun, it would have been a real gun. You bust down my door at 9:30 p.m. at night when I'm ready to go to bed. Everybody in my house that I know that I love is ready to go to bed. You bust down my door at 9:30 p.m. I am aiming a gun at you. If you're the police, you knock on the door when it's daytime out. Announce yourself, and I will come to the door and answer it. You don't come guns blazing. And you can ask, well, they have to do their job. I'm trying to play devil's advocate. They have to do their job, right? They don't know if you have a gun. They're just protecting themselves. Well, then don't enforce a marijuana law. I don't know how more simple to put it. I may be irritated. I may be shouting a little bit. Maybe. I don't know. I may sound frustrated to you guys, but it's a frustrating story. A 72-year-old lady shot because she was defending herself from people busting down her door, enforcing marijuana laws. I think I've said this like 12 times now, and I apologize. But I just want you to know the absurdity of that. We need to... there needs to be criminal justice reform. We need to reform or abolish the drug war. We need to end the drug war. The drug war that spends $44 billion, or that eats up $44 billion, but squanders $88 billion. It's $44 billion to cost or to fund the drug war. And then we potentially lose another $44 billion in money that would be generated if we legalized the war or if we legalized drugs. If we treated every drug like tobacco and alcohol, set some limit, maybe 18 or 21, whatever, we'll let the states decide, you could potentially generate another $44 billion. So not only are you saving $44 billion if you end the war on drugs, you are generating revenue of $44 billion. So you are saving $88 billion. Well, you're saving the taxpayers $44 billion. You're not spending that money that we're already generating in revenue, and then you're going to generate another $44 billion in revenue. So there's that. Or what you could do is just decrease taxes by $44 billion. Decrease taxes by $22 billion. And then decrease spending by another $22 billion, and then just pocket $44 billion. I think that's a simple, reasonable thing to talk about or to advocate for. I don't see a problem with it. So, those are all the stories that I wanted to share with you. Some of them extremely frustrating. They make my blood boil. Some of them just absolutely ridiculous. Like garden hoses and plastic straws, finding people $5,000 to $1,000 for that. I don't know, to me that just seems utterly ridiculous. Those are all the stories. Those are all the stories that I wanted to cover. I took 2 episodes to cover them. I finished these stories rather quickly, so I want to talk about government for us. The government has the means to enforce unjust laws. I can mention it for the 100th time. Marijuana laws. I don't even like marijuana. But the government has a monopoly on force. And it's 100% okay for them to use violence. We see this all the time. Whether it's the war on drugs, whether they're threatening little girls for opening up lemonade stands, whether they're raiding your farm for unpasteurized milk. There's always something that the government can bust down your door for. There's always something that the government could force you. Now, I know a lot of people who are out there think taxes are necessary, and maybe you're right. There's a lot of people who like taxes because it funds stuff that we all use. I guess. But I am of the opinion that taxation is theft. Morally, it's theft. Pragmatically, we need some sort of taxes. Some sort. I don't use that in a way to be construed to mean that we need to tax the ever-living shit out of you, especially if you're rich and you're productive. That being said, we need military. We need police. We need some sort of rule of law. We need courts. And I can understand an argument for interstate highways. I can understand the argument for that. Fine. But for the most part, morally, taxation is theft. Let's be honest. Taxation is theft. Especially the income tax. The income tax is my main focus. Tariffs, too. Tariffs are ridiculous. I could understand a tariff, a very small tariff, if you abolish other taxes. Because tariffs are used for trade wars. We use trade wars under we use tariffs as a means of squabbling the British and French War. We use tariffs we used trade as a means to dissolve conflict. It didn't work out for us. The American people didn't like it because it increased their costs. But again, taxation morally is theft. The government comes to your house with a gun and says, all right, give me this money and I'm going to fund X, Y, and Z. You say no, you go to jail. Or you resist and keep your money. You either go to jail or you get shot, depending on how far you resist. So they take your money, they fund all these things that you disagree with, services that you'll never use. We're talking about foreign aid, we're talking about welfare, we're talking about the police that we fund to shoot your dogs and shoot your 72-year-old grandmothers over marijuana. We're talking about fining you $1,000 for giving out a straw when the person that you're serving didn't ask for it. We're talking about the police showing up at your door because you didn't pay a $500 fine because you used a garden hose 48 hours after it rained. We're talking about civil asset forfeiture, where the government can come in and take your property without you actually being convicted of a crime. We're talking about 2 New York politicians, and I get that it's 2 out of several hundred New York politicians, but still some people who are in the government that think that they can ban Tide Pods. Imagine if there's 2 people that think that they can ban Tide Pods. Well, there's another 2 people that think that they can ban marijuana and use the police to enforce that law. There's another 2 people that think they can raise your taxes by 10%. There's another 2 people that think that they can criminalize gay marriage. They think they can force you not to get married or sign a contract, and if you do, you go to jail. There's people all over the world, all over this country, all over the United States, that think that they can use the police to enforce their laws that they deem moral. That is the government. The government is force. The government has a monopoly on the force. I want you to think about this for a second. What would happen if you busted down your neighbor's door? You know they're growing marijuana, so you bust down their door to get the marijuana plants. And marijuana is illegal in your state, but you know they have it. They still have it, even though it's illegal. You bust down their door. You're enforcing the law. What happens? You get shot. And then who's responsible for that? You're responsible for getting shot. Sure, maybe they also get in trouble for having marijuana. Well, now you're both fucked. You got shot. They're getting fined and going to jail over marijuana. Maybe that's how it works. Now, you can argue, well, you're not authorized to use force. That's exactly my point. Is you as a citizen, you're not authorized to use force. You don't get to. The government has a monopoly on it. And you can make an argument, especially for objectivists out there, that the government should be the only one who gets to use force. But when they use force, their ability to use force begins and ends where it comes to protecting your rights. And in this case, shooting 3 of your dogs to get some marijuana plants is not protecting your rights. Trying to do a prostitution sting on you and seizing your property is not protecting your rights. Charging you $1 million and spending 4 years so you can convert your own property into a different type of building is not protecting your rights. I mean, we can go on and on. The government monopoly on violence either should not exist or should be strictly to protect the rights of the individual. And that is the key thing here. The individual. The individual has rights. The state doesn't. The state has no rights. They have no moral obligation to use force to enforce laws that infringe upon your rights, whether it is speech, whether it is your life, liberty, property, or the pursuit of happiness. Nobody else has an obligation. Nobody else has the authority to stop you from doing that. That is up to you. Those are your rights. Your rights begin at life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness and expand from there. The state's rights ends where it violates your rights. They should enforce the law. They should enforce contracts. They should protect you from fraud. They should protect you. They should give you, the government's job is to give you legal recourse when your rights have been violated. That's simple. You enter a contract with somebody, they don't hold up the end of their deal. The government is there to make sure that you are adequately awarded or adequately paid for holding up your end of the contract. That's where the government monopoly on force and on violence should be. That's its sole focus, not whether or not you choose to put a substance into your own body. By the way, your body is your property. And if you voluntarily exchange with somebody for a drug, that drug is also your property. And then that interaction between you, the dealer, and then what you do with it, with your body, is none of the government's business. Do I think people should do drugs? No, not at all. I think drugs are terrible. Especially heroin, I don't think marijuana is on the same level as heroin. Heroin, opioids, cocaine, anything you can think of, those drugs are absolutely terrible. So, crack, that new thing that rots your skin from the inside, that's terrible too. But if you take a drug, it doesn't affect me. Now, we can have laws about public spaces and being on drugs there. We can have laws about operating a vehicle under the influence. We can have laws about being under the influence and then causing harm to another human being. But you should be able to do with your life as you please, as you want, as you see fit, so as long as you don't harm anybody else. So as long as you don't affect anybody else. And when I say affect, I don't mean some way that could be misconstrued to mean, oh, well, because it's all a giant circle of life and we're all symbiotic beings and we share the earth together, therefore what you do affects blah blah blah. No, none of that. If you consuming a drug ends up getting somebody else harmed, getting their property damaged, or getting somebody else killed, then you're responsible for it. Other than that, leave us alone. Imagine that you go what would happen if you went to somebody else's house with a gun and demanded money for them? But it's fine because you're going to take their money, you're going to feed the poor, you're going to give it to the military, you're going to give it to whoever else. What would happen? You'd probably get shot. Or your neighbor would be like, piss off, and shut the door in your face. That's probably what would happen. And like I said, we can make an argument for funding the military, for funding the police, for funding courts, and maybe roads. And you know what? Fine, let's say the post office. Even though FedEx and UPS does better. Sure, we can make an argument for the post office. That's in the Constitution. Military, police, courts, post office, roads. Maybe interstate. Only interstate. Those are in the Constitution. Well, roads aren't in the Constitution. I don't remember. But military defense is in the Constitution. Post office is also in the Constitution. Courts are in the Constitution as well. I think we can all agree that, at the very least, that defense, fine. Courts, fine. But we have to admit that taking money out of your paycheck, out of your means of production, is theft. It's immoral. It's morally reprehensible. I think that we can also agree that there's a difference between a consumption tax and an income tax. Now, I know the most anarchist out there is going to say that a consumption tax is still theft. And that an income tax is also theft. I think they're right in principle, but an income tax is directly out of your paycheck. Let's just say you and your employer agree that you're going to work $10 an hour. And let's say you work 4 tens. So each day you make $100. Each day you go to work, you make $100. But out of that $100, 25 of that dollar, anywhere from, depending on where you live, I think the federal standards, anywhere from 13 to 35% goes to the federal government. They seize that money from the means of your labor. That is entirely different from you going to the store and paying a simple tax on that product. And here's why it's different. Because generally you'll have your generic brand, and then you will have your name brand. So your generic brand is $1. Your name brand is $2. You only owe a penny tax. You only owe a 1% tax on things that you buy. So the taxes for the generic brand is $1.01, and then the taxes for the name brand is $2.02. If you want to, you can go with the generic brand and save 1%. So that's why consumption tax is slightly different. The more you buy, the more you consume, the more taxes you pay. That's different. And we can even argue that a property tax, because it pays for the military to defend your land. And maybe we can come to some agreement on income tax at a level of maybe 5%. If you advocate for a 5% income tax instead of what we have now, you're my friend. But in principle, we must admit that taxation is theft. Whether or not you think it is necessary. So we should find a way to limit government monopoly. And we should find a way to keep the money where it belongs, to the people. Thank you for listening to this episode. I know I went on a tangent. I'm still new to this whole thing. I'm still trying to piece together things that I believe, why I believe them. I'm still trying to piece together everything that's happening in the world. Thank you guys so much. Thank you for listening to Logan For Liberty Podcast number 2, episode number 2, part 2 of Government Force. Have a good day. Stay free. Stay safe.